Just so they know about it. They know about it. I want them to be aware of what's there.
Actually, I don't know personally, but like very excited about it.
I'm really feeling
He's just hopeful that they survive.
Well, I met him at the same round table last a year ago. So
yeah, actually, that's right. He texted me like, that's really a longer time. Oh, yeah.
now
that explains why he asked that question. I didn't know. Like, why are you asking me this? Yeah, I know.
Yes, we do. We jump right in. We do technology stuff. I remember students. Yeah. Oh, it's not because you met. In fact, I just have to my side. It is the situation. And the CNA.
Oh, sorry.
Take your seat for a second.
I talked to Holly Bell for a brief moment.
well, because the last thing I got from
Well, she's not going to
nobody knew how to do it.
We're making dreams.
Godfather. Sarah was like the godmother. You're the godfather.
Like him, Jill, Sarah.
But not the kind that like 4, 5, 9, 4, It actually reset my computer and weird. Oh my god. Yeah. It came up as where did I go?
Number one.
They have
right, absolutely. No, however, we have to hold enough money. But, you know,
And it doesn't say whether it was run by a school district, it says school for students.
Dutch over there.
Okay.
I can move over here.
No, I can make it. I'll find my way.
Scott's not.
Scott's not here.
Yeah, so there you go.
Okay.
You guys switch.
That's always a good thing to do. And they know that I have no idea what I'm doing, so they're just trying to be nice. I'll be right back.
You're fine, 100%. I don't know what this whole thing is going on. This morning until midnight. But it's a friend we got. Those are.
Yeah, when did something about it?
I don't know. We wanted to see. It's really got Anne. But not really as hard. Okay. What a really pretty group we have here today. All the colors. We're going to go ahead and get started. Dr. Patty Norman will be here momentarily, I want to excuse board member Scott Hansen and welcome our new board member, Mark Marsh.
Thank you.
Before we introduce those at the table, why don't we go around and just say who's here? If you want to say anything else, be my guest. It's nice to have you back. Hope you had a great time.
Thanks. Linda Hanks, local board member in Jeff School District, representing the Jeff School Boards Association.
Terry Shoemaker, USBA and USSA, Superintendent's Association. And I'm glad Linda and Britt both are here.
You're always hard.
Bridget Gerard, and representing USBA and local board member on data school.
Nice.
Yay!
I'm Alan. I'm here with the USB Digital Audit Department. Listening in.
Thanks.
Brandon Jacobson, CTE.
Julia Longhurst, Director of Career and Technical Education.
Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor.
Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator.
Michelle from SafeUT.
Kathy Davis, USB Suicide Prevention Specialist.
Route Washington School Safety Specialist.
Corby Easton, USB Student Support Prevention.
Jared Wright, USB Assessment.
And I'm Jennifer Gravin. I represent District 4 and I'm a junior high teacher.
I'm Linda Hansen. I represent District 3, which is Twilla, Juab, and West Valley and Magna. And what am I? I don't know. I'm a mom.
You're a board member extraordinaire, superstar.
Janet Cannon. I represent District 8
which is granite and Murray. And a long time ago, I was a speech pathologist.
You still are. I see you analyzing
I can
people's
still
speech
do that.
patterns. Lateral lift or frontal.
Oh,
I know what you're doing.
I can help them.
And I'm Mark Marsh. I'm the newbie, so go easy on me. No.
We're really kind of a nice committee.
That's what they said. They put me with the ones that would be kind to me.
Oh, raise your hand if you're not kind in here. See? Proof.
I live in Colville. I represent District 12, which is basically all of the school districts in northeastern Utah from Daggett all the way down to Summit County where I live. We also go down Provo Canyon and around Orem's city limits and back up Provo Canyon. So.
Wow.
Nice.
Norley Crane, and I am board secretary.
I'm Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement, and I love this community.
We love you. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. There we go. Okay. So now down to business. We are going to, Jennifer Thronston needed to be in another place, and that's our number 1 with board policy 3002. So we're going to move that. We're going to just go to number 2, which is R277473. It's the Utah Computer Science Grant Program. And this rule was enacted due to the passage of House Bill 227, which allows the board to adopt rules regarding certain grant applications. It involves Talent Ready. So we're going to let our 2 experts talk to us about that, and we'll ask them questions.
Yes. Good to be here. Glad to kick off the meeting today.
Oh.
And we're going to talk about computer science right now, so that's even more exciting. So what you've got before you is Rule 473. It's a new rule, as Board Member Gravitt highlighted, in response to House Bill 227. The legislature this last session created a computer science grant program, so school districts and charters can apply and have received money to build out their computer science programs. This program is run in conjunction with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. In fact, it is housed there with the Talent Ready Utah Board. We are the fiscal agent because it is education fund money, and we get first right of approval and denial of the applications, and then they are sent on to the Talent Ready Utah Board for final approval. A caveat to all of this is in the legislative session, the bill originally started with $7.1 million ongoing. When everything shook out with some uncertainties of the tax reform bill, they gave 3.2 one time. It's a little more difficult to create long-lasting programs when it's one time. So what we have decided to do in working with staff is we want to use the money this go around and kind of mimic what was, not kind of, truly mimic what we did with digital teaching and learning. We'll be providing planning grants this year to all the LEAs so they can begin creating plans toward the expansion of their computer science programs, with the idea that next year, after the session has come and the money has rained down upon us,
Oh, it always does.
yes, we will be able to do the full expansion and actually give grants for implementation of the plans.
Right.
So what you see before you essentially in this rule is kind of outlining, creating a committee, looking through the plans, plan approval, although plan approval will not be happening right away, and then the planning grant component up on lines 32, 33. But we're happy to, I don't know if you have anything to add, or we're happy to answer any questions you guys have.
I think we have some questions, so I think Board Member Hanson, you have a question or two?
Yeah, and I hate to harp on this, but, I was in charge of the committee that went through all those advisory committees.
Yeah, no, this is good.
And so my question is, who are they advising? Are they advising us, or are they advising the Talent Ready Board?
They will advise you.
So they're one of our advisory committees, and so Lorraine's adding them to the list of our advisory committees, and
Per this rule, she would.
filling all that paperwork out and all of that
Fair
policy
question.
stuff,
See where you're
to
going.
create one, because that's what the problem we had before, is we had all these advisory committees and they were all kind of lost in the, in the paperwork somewhere, and so we had to dig them all out and figure out what they all were and put them in a place where we could remember we had them. Right?
Yeah.
And so we don't want to lose track. So, anyway, so that's
Fair point. And I think to that point, the reason why we went with this advisory committee in this rule in particular is that's what we do with digital teaching and learning, and we thought it would make sense to make sure that those who have the expertise in computer science are prepared and ready to help the LEAs understand where the plans are great, where the plans could use some help. And as much as we'd love to give that all to staff, that would be one person with all the LEAs, and I don't know.
No, I don't have a problem with it at all, as long as Lorraine is happy.
As long as it works.
Fair point.
That's
Yeah,
the one
model.
that's good, yeah.
I will make sure to get Lorraine some extra Diet Coke. For sure.
Good. Yes.
One of the things is after every committee meeting or every board meeting that we have, there's a debrief that occurs the following week. Where we go to the granular level of what's happened in the committees and what needs to occur afterwards as action items. So this would be loaded with the action item of what needs to happen. And before a committee meeting, we have a pre-planning, so she's aware that this is on the agenda, and then if passed, then what the action item would be to then promote it in the level of achieving the goal.
Oh, good. Cool. Oh, good.
See how organized.
I know. Board Member Candace.
Yeah, so I have some questions too. First of all, on line 52, it talks about, in addition to the chairs, which are prescribed in the rule, the board, in consultation with the Talent Ready Utah board, shall appoint 5 members to the advisory committee. And I thought, okay, it seems a little nebulous to me who the board is, and we're talking about several boards. I wondered if we could put something in the definitions that says, in this rule, the board where it says the board, it means the Utah State Board of Education.
Absolutely.
Then it talks about these plans have a 4-year duration, using educators, peer educators, and parents, and they will model an outline for each grade level. So is that focus through kindergarten through 12?
Yes.
So it will they'll have a plan for every single grade level to do
Isn't that awesome?
computer. And I want to say something else. I went to the NASD, New Board Member Institute, and there I met with a gal named Valerie Norval, who is their editor-in-chief, and she was talking to me about a special paper she had done on state innovations. And the state innovation was about Utah's digital teaching and learning, which on a national basis they thought was so outstanding that they wanted to print something up about it and distribute it across the nation. So I see this following some of those same ideas, and I just wanted to tip my hat.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Madam Chair, looking down on the lines 33 and 34, it shows that the planning grant awarded under that subsection would be up to $30,000. According to your state here, having been working in and being a part of a smaller school district, it goes per student enrollment. Can you give me an idea of how that's broke down as to what 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A schools might be getting? Or
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So the goal, yes, Brandon Jacobson, IT education. I'm actually switching roles from IT and computer science over to general financial literacy. So I'll present this. The gentleman that's going to be over this is Joel Marquez moving forward. So anything I say, you can make sure you hold him to it. And he's great. He's actually, right now, they're going to be there to Janet's comment about kindergarten through 12th grade. They're actually establishing the K-5 computer science standards right now. So they have a final redraft or revisit of those.
It is.
Yep.
Yep.
In the next little bit. So the way they're doing it is the traditional LEAs. It's been estimated that they're going to be getting about $30,000 all throughout all 41 school districts. That's one of the estimations when we go through our model. Then when we look at percentages, because it's a lot harder. And when we go through our planning, it's a lot harder for, let's take South Summit High. No, it's not South Summit. It's cool.
We're North Summit.
You're North Summit. Okay.
But I still represent South Summit, so I'm good.
So are you the green? The green
I'm
colors
purple
or
and gold.
Purple and gold. Okay.
Yep.
That would be South Side.
Yeah, I know.
South Summit's green and white.
I know.
Go neutral.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So Park City.
Park City. There you go.
No, for a small school like North and South Summit, those different schools, it's not going to be on a per pupil. It takes them actually more money per pupil to actually do a plan. than it does for, let's take Board Member Cannon's Granite School District. It's going to take them a lot less per pupil because of the thousands of students they have compared to the couple thousands that you have.
Right.
So that's been estimated to be about anywhere from, on the lowest that we'd ever do for one of the traditional LEAs, and this is also to get the plan up and running, and we estimate them not needing the full 30,000 even, and that's like the top tier. But if they need that much, that's the amount that we have planned out of this 3.15 to be able to allocate to them. We have enough. We've estimated enough to allow every single school district in the state of Utah to apply for a planning grant. Not that we don't hope that they don't all do it, but we want them to be ready to do it. We don't want to force any LEA to do it. But the money that isn't used, we hope to use for further implementation. Even though this is one-time fund, it's going to be hard if we have, let's say we even have $1 million left over after all the planning grants have been allocated out. That $1 million may not be enough for 4-year plans for even 2 or 3 school districts, depending on size, depending on scalability of their computer science program. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It did.
But yeah.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yep.
Do committee members have any other questions? Yeah.
Ready for a motion?
Sure.
I would move that the committee approve R277473 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to approve R277473 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
I'll
Is there any,
I'd second that.
oh, okay. Any discussion to the motion? And we don't need a second. I did that too. So
I've already made my first one.
no, that's okay. I didn't want it to come out.
Got that out of the way.
You keep doing it, and then all of us like, always a second.
Just point of order that in our documents, it has draft 2.
Is it draft 2 that we're passing or draft 1?
I think it's draft 2.
Draft 2.
What's draft 2?
Oh, it's
Okay.
draft 2.
So
Okay.
that's just the
Yeah,
minute of draft 2.
Yeah, memo is it?
And then would we need to do, as amended, who brought up the board? Which board?
I don't
Yeah.
know, it may be, Jeff will have to check, because it may be standard as well, whenever it
Okay.
says board.
It is defined in Rule 100.
It's different. Okay.
But if
it's
you wanted to
capitalized,
call out,
it's-
I think that would also be whatever the.
Well, let's talk about talent ready board and the board.
But it's like Dr. Norman says, when it's capitalized, it's the Utah State Board. But it's not capitalized, it's every other board in the world.
It's a defined term.
Okay, so we'll
So draft
do that.
2.
Okay. Okay, so let me restate the motion.
Oh, thanks.
The motion is to approve R277473 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on third and final reading, or second and final reading, sorry, second and final reading. Any more discussion to that motion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving on to agenda item number 3, which I'll give you a second with our new civic clerk. A little harder to navigate. This is R277400 School Facility Emergency and Safety Amendment. I'm going to let our experts go ahead and talk about this.
Okay,
Start us off.
I'll give the intro and then I'll pass it off to far more fascinating people than myself.
Oh, there's nobody more fascinating than you, Jeffrey.
I disagree.
Of course you do. Soul that you are.
I do try. So Rule 400 is the School Facility Emergency and Safety Rule. What we're adding here, we have some staff recommendations in lieu of the strategic plan that you, the board, have passed and moved forward on. So this is part of the Safe and Healthy Schools part of the strategic plan. The changes are really down on starting around line 186. I'll just quickly highlight these and I can pass it over to Christy and Kathy to kind of explain in more detail some of the reasoning behind these changes. So starting on line 186, we have some changes regarding a section that referred to care teams. This was already in the rule, been in the rule for several years. And we just wanted to put in more explanation as what a care team is, what it entails, what they would do. So you'll see that kind of from 186 down to 201. And in all transparency, this is very much modeled after House Bill 120's original version regarding threat assessment teams. These are not necessarily threat assessment teams in the full scope of what House Bill 120 had envisioned. But these are multidisciplinary teams that LEAs can put together to start moving that work forward. And as you do recall, we received $150,000 a session to move that work forward for LEAs who were wanting to try it. So this is in response to that. And then on line 204 or 205 down to 221-ish, you have some new things in relation to the strategic plan as well, in helping LEAs establish crisis response protocols. We've had some comments from LEAs on wanting more guidance on what do we do when something happens, like what's a good bare bones checklist of what we would want to have in order so that we could respond appropriately to a crisis. Within that, you'll also notice the requirement for LEAs to have a safe UT liaison identified. LEAs already have a person who does safe UT. We would just like to make sure that that person is identified so that we at the board and safe UT can know who is supposed to be the point person rather than having it default on just the principal or vice principal, unless that's who they want. But we want to make sure that person is identified and known. But with that, I'll pass it off to Christy and Kathy to kind of give more details for these changes.
Oh, thank you. All right. Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator here at USBE. What Kathy's passing around here is basically a visual or matrix, if you will, of the strategic plan and the different components that are directly related to our goal of safe and healthy schools. And so we've got prevention, intervention, and postvention. So every basically element of theme, right? And then we also have the 3 levels of interaction. So we have the environmental piece, which is the positive environments. We have healthy relationships and physical well-being. And then we have the internal. So if you think about it kind of from the outside in, that's the best way I like to conceptualize it. And then mental and emotional well-being is there at the bottom. And so you can see where each of these elements that we adjusted within this board rule are represented. So they are directly tied to essential pieces of what we want to do within school safety. So that's first and foremost with this strategic plan. And then along with the rationale behind adding these elements, it's also part of the Utah School Safety Commission's recommendations from 2019, and it's also 3 of the 8 recommendations for a comprehensive school violence prevention plan from the Federal Commission on School Safety. And so all of these things have kind of led to, these are pieces that we absolutely need to have as a guide for our LEAs.
Great, thank you. Okay, Kathy Davis, Suicide Prevention Specialist. If you'll go to the definitions, it is on line 35. We added new language with regards to safe messaging. And safe messaging in this definition means strategies and styles for communicating about the topic of suicide. So I'm going to have Christy pass mine out. I'm a former teacher, so I usually just give the
teacher's helper here.
Yeah, she's my student aide today, so to speak. Delia said. So, as you know, I've been in this capacity as a suicide prevention specialist for the past couple of years, and I really feel that we are, although we haven't seen our mental health indicators trend in the direction that we want, I see that with putting some things in place like safe messaging and the way that we talk about suicide and train everybody is going to really make a difference. So if you'll notice on this, safe messaging is just how you talk about suicide. How do you address this topic to decrease stigma? Because after a suicide, your 2 main goals are to restore the learning environment for students so that they feel safe again, but also more than anything else, you want to prevent further suicides and really make sure that contagion among teenagers is something that we really have to be really wary of because we see that that does happen. So this just will give you kind of a guide work of all the recommendations for depicting suicide. We're so fortunate in Utah to have Safe UT as an additional way to combat crisis and to respond in real time to when our kids are at their greatest need.
That concludes our presentation.
Okay, let me ask, are there any questions from committee? Janet?
So I was interested to see that on line 187, we had added here a piece on social and emotional learning. And I think that hasn't been there before, has it? Is that new? Can you kind of elaborate on what that is and what you're saying? We're having a conference in a couple of weeks on social and emotional learning, and I don't know if that instigated this or tell me what your thinking is.
So social emotional learning is a broad topic as far as addressing the whole child, as you know. And so that is one of those things that is an essential program within any school in order to help them learn how to function in life and not just give them the academic they need to be successful. Because you know the emotional intelligence quotient is, in my opinion, every bit as important as the actual IQ. And so that piece, it's part of the student assistance program. So in context with this, when we look at solid prevention efforts, you need to be giving kids coping skills, the ability to interact and connect, because it's one thing to say, you know, the best protective factor is for kids to connect to something positive. But if they don't know how to connect, then that's going to be very, very difficult for them. Social emotional learning helps with that connection piece. So it helps me know, you know, when Jeff looks at me sideways, it's not because he hates me. I understand socially what that means. I know when somebody's talking to me how to, Jeff does that a lot. But, you know, how to make eye contact, how to carry on a conversation. And those are essential elements to having healthy relationships, which directly impacts mental health, the feelings of safety, the feelings and perspective of a positive climate. And so social emotional learning is something that we will be addressing within our Safe and Healthy Schools department as something we want to push forward with more resources, more curriculum identified, and so yes, I hope that answers your question.
How do teachers know how to do what you're discussing? Is this part of
really
that's
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's something that is part of the School Safety Center. Is Jeff recognized there's $150,000 for curriculum. Part of that includes all of these elements. So emergency response protocol, positive school climate, mental health, and social emotional learning. And with one of our members of the School Safety Center coming on from the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, that individual will also be working with our comprehensive guidance specialists in order to find these resources, to get more of them out there. A lot of schools have been doing them independently. They are very much invested in that portion of addressing the whole child. But we want to be sure that as a state agency, we're giving them guidance, we're giving them resources, and we're providing that training.
Thank
Can
you.
I ask, have you had feedback from LEAs or what do they think about this rule? Do they like it? Is it clear to them?
You want to speak to that?
I mean, and we have people who could speak to that, but yes, we could do that too.
Sure. I mean, I could tell you what our conversation has been in terms of USSA. We had our policy meeting that we have every Monday before board. We can go over all the rules and the changes and get their perspective. There's definitely concerns about feasibility and trying to make sure that this is something we can scale out and do correctly, but everyone agrees it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
So that's kind of the response to this rule, and Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, is we support it. We understand it's going to be moving forward in, can I put those words in your mouth? He's like, wait a minute.
Keep going.
Pretty good, actually.
That's why he's here.
Terry Shoemaker with the Utah School Board Association and the Utah School Superintendents Association. And Jeff actually did reflect our conversation. We had a good conversation about this. There was some discussion, are we stretching this a little bit beyond what the bills ended up finally being? But then we decided to stretch, use another person that works here, was what's it called? The juice was, and the squeeze were worth each other, okay? We're part of the same thing. The juice was worth the squeeze, right? So in this case, the additions are very meaningful, and so that's where we ended up with it. But we're going to need some time to get there related to it, and I think that's what he was saying here. The process of what we're doing with school safety, and Board Member Marsh knows this very well in his own district, it is an ongoing process. And it's one that the school board's members, the local board members, and the superintendents, and the school building principals, and the teachers, everybody, and the parents who've been asking tons of questions and being involved in tons of conversations take very, very seriously. So what we hope that this does is continue to move that conversation forward, because there are needs that are not met right now financially and training-wise that we have got to get met in the future. And so this is a good step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I provide some data
Yes,
just to support those statements as well? So the multidisciplinary teaming process, these are all numbers that were gathered from the 2019 school safety survey that was sent out to 437 building administrators. And from those responses, when they were asked if they were doing the multidisciplinary teaming process, 88% said yes or yes, but needs improvement. And same with if these 437 building principals have access to a community crisis response team, which is part of the identification of who's going to be part of your crisis response team in that crisis response protocol within the board rule. 84% also said yes and yes, but needs improvement. Okay. And then as well as, do you have a crisis response protocol for a death or incident at your school? About the same, 86% said yes or yes, but needs improvement. And so what we aim to do really is to elevate those yeses so that there's fewer yes, but needs improvement. And so we want to be able to provide those resources, provide that support so that we get more solid, absolutely yes, we are ready, we are prepared, and we know how to handle those things.
Great, thank you for that. I think Board Member Hanson had a question.
Actually, it's just maybe a technical thing. On line 37, where it talks about secondary schools. Secondary school means a school with only the grades 6 through 12. The schools in my neighborhood are K-6, so they would be secondary schools according to this definition.
I'm glad you brought this up,
Yes.
actually, Chair Finley.
Yeah, please.
This is actually a definition that was brought in at the recommendation of our finance team. There was confusion from some of the LEAs when they were interacting with some of the reporting back to the finance team of the drills they have to do. And we took out of the definition section of this rule the last time we updated it, the definitions of secondary and elementary. And so the question was, well, elementary and secondary, we have these ideas of like K-6 and 7 through 12, but what happens with the middle school, like the 6 through 8, or the charter that has a K through 8 or whatever, and what drill requirements apply to these schools that have a mix? And so we decided to draw the line that secondary just says 6 through 12. So if you have 6 through 12 in your building, you'll be held to the secondary school drill requirements.
No, what if you have, but that's not what this says. This says if you have any of them.
Yeah.
So that means if you have one of these, so an elementary would
be held to the
that's
secondary.
K-6 would be held to the secondary.
Yeah, they would have any.
Because they would have any one of them, they would have 6th grade.
Elementary is held to a higher number.
That's right. Elementary does higher.
Could we put 7 through 12? Because
Sure.
they would have at least
Would make more
7.
sense.
Right.
We can do that.
Because the middle school is going to have 6, 7, 8.
Right.
So 7 through 12 is more. Makes more sense.
We can make that change.
Oh, great catch.
Yeah.
Any other questions from committee, or is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment on this? Okay, well,
I would.
Oh, again? Just kidding.
Sorry.
No, I.
No, because it applies to what you were just, what Linda's question was.
Good.
One of the things that I worked with the fire marshal was this numbers of drills and the protocols for that. And there were adjustments made in the statute this last year. Okay. So that we were doing it according to it made sense according to the grades that were there, actually. And the code requires secondary schools to have fewer than it does elementary schools. So that catch was an important catch because we have schools all across the state that have elementary schools that have sixth grade, but we also have elementary schools that only go to fourth grade. Okay, and there was a time when we only had kindergarten only schools. Okay, so that catch was an important catch, but the statute, the rule itself, got adjusted slightly this last year, so that it was consistent, so that the schools didn't necessarily have to always do the same type of drill. That was the important piece of what we were doing with the fire marshal, and I wanted to make sure that was part of the same conversation. So when you talked about that catch, part of the reason it got adjusted was we wanted to make sure that the right kinds of drills were being conducted for all the different types of options that we could have, problems that we could have in a school related to school safety. That's all I wanted to add to this.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, ready for a motion if someone's willing to make it.
Okay, I will move that the committee approve draft 2 as amended on first reading and recommend that the board approve on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is that we approve Art 277-400, draft 2 as amended on first reading and then forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Is there any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, guys. Oh, that's awesome. Great job. Okay, we are on to agenda item number 4, which is the K-5 computer science standards. We've now gone through our 30 days of public comment, and I'm happy to hear about the next step in the process.
So just Ashley Higgs, CTE K-8 Education Specialist. So we have finished our 30-day process back in June. We were here in May asking for open comment. Just a reminder that we are a non-core, so the process is a little different. We only have a 30-day open comment versus 60-day. So we had our 30-day comment open in June. That closed at the beginning of July. We received one comment on it with regards to keyboarding being a part of it. And as we looked at it, we believed that we wanted to keep the computer science and the keyboarding separate because we didn't want schools to feel like if they were doing keyboarding, they were doing computer science. However, as we are updating the elementary keyboarding standards, we will be aligning it to the K-5 computer science standards. So teachers are seeing what their overlap is so that they understand that there is some, but it's not the same thing. And so with that, we met in July to go through the document to update any changes that we felt necessary. With the majority of the changes you'll see as the context statements below the standard itself. And we are here to ask that it be submitted for the board for approval.
Do you want to go through any substantive changes that happened?
No, as we met, so we had specialists in the in the elementary field with us to look through it. We read through each standard, we read through the context, and we wanted to make sure that we had things that elementary teachers could understand, hence why the context statements are there. As this rolls out and it happens year after year. We're hoping to get rid of those content statements, but we felt it was important to have those so that teachers wouldn't read the standard and say, I have no idea what an algorithm is in first grade, but giving them a context of what they're probably already doing in their classroom to help them understand that they're really already doing it. It's just new verbiage. The other thing is that at the end of the document, we do have a glossary. So in any of the standards, if it's bold and underlined, that will be found in the glossary so that they have that understanding and they're teaching the same terms.
That makes sense. It looks like more changes, but really...
Yeah, it's not. It was just, we wanted to make sure that the examples that we gave were things that they would understand or notice that they're already doing and being able to connect the two.
Do committee members have questions?
I have comments.
Or comments? Comments are good too.
I have comments, so I'll give you your second comment, Ashley.
Okay.
These are awesome.
Yes,
Thank you.
we talked about
I
it.
thought these are so great. I'm sorry that we
I
didn't
had
have
a
them
fabulous
before.
team,
They
so I
are
cannot take all the credit. I had a great
They
team.
are going to be fantastic. So I just have to say that.
Thank you. I
They're
appreciate it.
so well written, and I'm excited for the kids.
I am too.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. Any other questions or comments? Jen?
I'm the curmudgeon of the group.
That's okay. It's still worded.
Yeah, because as I was reading through these, I thought, gosh, it doesn't really say that the student has, the students are really using computer type things until third grade, and then it gets into a lot more of them using actual computer things. And I thought of my little granddaughter who was on the Upstart program at age 4. And I would just sit by her and she would have the iPad in front of her and she would be doing all of the things. And I thought, oh my gosh, she can do this in kindergarten.
So the reason behind that is if you notice, a lot of the context ones are unplugged activities because districts and schools will have different devices. These are just suggestions. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is what they have to do. We didn't want to be program specific, software specific, but if you're at a school such as, let's say, Park City, who's been doing a lot of computer science at their elementary level, this is just the bare minimum. This is what we're expecting, but if you can go above and beyond, go for it. Because we understand that majority of the state at the elementary level, this is going to be something brand new, where they won't necessarily have code and go mice, or they won't have programming where they can use it in the classroom. So we tried to give them unplugged activities. So first they feel comfortable about what they're doing, and then they can add the technology. But this isn't set in stone that a teacher has to do it this way. If they're advanced in what they're already doing in their district, they're more than welcome to bring in other activities to do it. We just wanted to make sure that because it's so new, we wanted teachers to feel comfortable instead of, hey, guess what, you're going into Scratch Junior, and they're going, what? I'm barely learning how to do an attachment in an email, or knowing the difference between reply and reply all. It's like, so we didn't want to overwhelm the teachers. So that's why a lot of them are unplugged. You'll notice in the later grades, we actually do say software specific, such as Scratch Junior. But as we've gone out, last school year, we've gone to multiple schools, and towards the end, after we've been in the classroom a couple of times, we did start introducing Scratch Junior in the first grade. So it's just the level of comfort for the teacher. But we're hoping that, because kids are coming out of the womb with iPhones.
I know.
So
they're going to know this. I mean, put together a peanut butter sandwich. I relate that to what they're doing on a computer.
So we did that with my daughter, and she still talks about it. She's going into second grade. She's like, will you come and make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches again? Like, she still talks about that. And the funny thing is one of the teachers we had in the room as we were updating this, and we did that example, she's like, I do this with my kids, and they love it. And so the fact that they can connect these things, so.
Okay, I do have one thing that I'd like you to consider.
Okay.
It's Standard 2 N1.1. It's page 16.
Thank you.
So you're talking about passwords.
Mm-hmm.
Explain what a password is, why it's used, and be able to create a secure password. So I have a daughter that works for Apple, and she has chided me for my passwords. And she said the new thing, which is more secure, is having a passphrase.
Yep.
And so I wondered if we wanted to include something about a passphrase.
I believe if you go towards, and this will be in the elementary keyboarding standards, so we align this to we're formatting it as by the end of grade 2 and then by the end of grade 5, students will be able to do these things. By the end of grade 2, students will be able to explain why you have a password, why you don't share it, that sort of thing. And then by the end of grade 5, we actually have the criteria. So it's more than 8 characters, it's a phrase and things like that. So, yep, so it builds upon it. If you want, we're more than welcome to add stuff to it. I believe there is one in 5th or 4th grade for NI that goes more in depth with the passwords.
I was just focusing on this, and I thought this sounds like what used to be acceptable for passwords, and they have moved on from that.
And we students are still learning the writing and that stuff, so they're not going to necessarily know phrases. So we also did it by grade level of what are kids doing at that grade point to be able to do it.
And then the only other suggestion I had was they're talking about creating graphs and labeling graphs and so forth. And I thought, you ever created a graph on a computer? It's so much easier than creating a graph. I'd love to see them create a graph on a computer instead of doing it, at this level and then having to relearn later on.
Again, it's sort of sequential.
Yeah, it's
right?
sequential. So, for example, we went to a 2nd grade school in Granite our last visit, and they were working on collecting data and creating different types of charts. And so what we actually had them do is create a Google form.
Oh, nice.
And had them collect data, and students went from computer to computer to collect their data. And then we showed how Google, hey, look at this type of chart. What is it? And so I think it's a progression thing, is first show them on paper and then show them on the computer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, except if the standard just says do this on paper.
Which standard does it?
I wish it would say do it on paper and then do it on the computer.
Is it still on page 16?
Standard 2, DA2, and DA3.
What page is that?
I got it. Identify and describe patterns and visualization. You said DA2?
DA2, collect and present data in various visual formats, page 17.
Okay, visual formats.
Such as drawing a picture graph and a bar graph with up to 4 categories.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, as we were going through these with devices for teachers and things like that, I think it was more of what's the beginning, this is the bare minimum, so this is what we're hoping. They're already doing this in the math as well, so we wanted to make sure that they could see the cross-curricular and things. So in math, that it aligned to the math standards of what was being taught in grade 2, so we tried to use the same verbiage.
And this wouldn't preclude.
No, and like exactly.
But my point is, so they're learning this in math. These standards are to teach them computer science. So maybe we teach them the same, but we teach them on a computer instead of in math. They'd have the visual.
Sure, maybe one of the words could be creating, and then leaves it open to the students.
Such as creating a picture graph.
Such as creating a picture graph.
With that way, it could be open to interpretation. Because some kids do, like, computer science is also process. It's not just on the computer. And for me,
critical thinking.
Yes.
So
I like to visualize. I still am somebody who likes to write it first and then go to the computer, but it doesn't change the skill. Yeah.
So would you want it to say
Would
something?
that work for you, Janet? Creating?
Well, I think these are computer science standards, and they ought to relate to computer science instead of relating to other things they're doing. If I was a teacher, I'd think, I don't have to do anything for computer science.
Go ahead.
But you're speaking from the mathematics background, I know that a lot of mathematics is built on the concrete pictorial to abstract. And so that concrete, usually they're having the little ones, if we're looking at grades 2 in kindergarten, they start to have them create graphs with their bodies. So it's something on the ground and they'll say, now how many do like this stand in a line? And now that's a bar graph, and then do things like that. So that it starts to connect it in the concrete and then, put something down and develop the chip. So I think that is moving with progression. So if it's concrete, pictorial, abstract, then the word create encompasses all of those things to differentiate those levels. And even on a computer, when they're creating, they could be doing all of those things. They could be manipulating a computer object to make it concrete, and then pictorial, and then they could then do the abstract by creating.
Yeah, but we're not saying that. I guess I love what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. And the standard is to collect and present data in various visual formats. And I do think sometimes, well, I mean, Ashley, you can speak to this better than I can in terms of computer science is, like you said, critical thinking process. Sometimes a lot happens before you can get on the computer because it's a way of thinking. But how do you feel about creating?
I'm fine with that. Like I said, when we did the context,
but I don't think that's where you're going. You want it to specifically say on a computer.
Well, so have them stand and create a bar graph, and then let the teacher show them what that bar graph would look like created on a computer.
And I think that's simple. In the standard itself, to collect and present data using various technology and visual formats.
Yeah, what if we added using various technological?
Probably better to give them a bigger variety.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the standard, I'm just reading. So in the standard, not the context statement, you want it to read collect and present data in various
technical and visual formats.
Technical and visual. Okay.
Technical means something different.
Yeah.
Technical, maybe like the level of specificity, like so yeah. So I would say technological, or computer. Yeah.
See, and I guess I'm looking and saying present data in various
digital. And I want to make sure that doesn't change the progression. That doesn't.
I don't think it. Well,
a writing committee. Well, I guess the writing committee is going to be looking at it.
Yeah, I can look. I think the other thing is that the fact that we say various visuals.
That's how I saw
that. That can mean it could be on paper. It could be creating on a computer. And so to me, if you're adding digital, I think we're already assuming digital in some things. But I mean, it's something I can take back to the committee and see. And look to see what grades 3, 4, and 5 look like as far as that.
Would it be okay to have that be a discussion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think, Patty?
Looking back in the NI area, the network and internet, there's a beginning piece that speaks to what is going to come next. So if we look at NI, it does talk about technology. If we go down to 2 and 1.1, it talks about digital resources, and then it talks about digital data coming next. And so if we were to keep going within grade 2, it seems like that's where it's introduced with the digital formatting.
We can have digital. I'm fine with that.
Sorry, that students will collect and present various digital and visual formats. Various visual and digital formats.
Various formats, including digital. Well, it depends on if you want it to be.
Yeah. So my question is instead of changing the standard, we could change it in the context statement so that it would say students will collect and present data in various visual formats, such as drawing a pictograph and bar graph, then creating a spreadsheet, or so then you can incorporate a digital component of it so it shows a progression. So first they're collecting it, because you also don't want a student to go straight to the computer and just start, like they need to collect the data and then they go and create the bar graph or whatever in Excel.
That's right. I think it needs to say creating a picture graph instead, like Patty mentioned, instead of drawing.
Such as creating
a picture graph or bar graph.
Or bar, well, not and a bar graph. Or a bar graph.
And / or.
Creating graph.
What if you said such as creating a graph, and then in parentheses you could say picture, comma, bar, etc.
Do you want that in the form of a motion? Yeah, Jen. Okay, I'll go ahead and state that. I'll see if I can restate it back.
Well, I'm a little lost.
Okay,
You
well,
say it.
yeah, or I can try to. So it sounds like the motion before the committee is to change on page 17, right? Where it says students will collect and present data in various visual formats such as creating a graph, parentheses, picture, bar, etc. Is that where we were headed?
Well, I was just thinking we already have a parentheses in there.
Yeah,
so that's why I'm like,
So put single unit scale graph.
So such as creating a graph, parentheses, picture, a single unit scale.
No, I thought you. So I thought, okay, such as creating a single unit scale graph, bar or picture.
So picture is not the main one. I thought, okay.
So a single unit scale.
So I think in second grade, all they're
Right,
using
that's what I
is
was
bar
saying.
graphs.
That's why because you don't want to just limit it to bar graphs.
Yeah.
So that's why picture is the broader term.
So you say picture.
So you say picture parentheses. Is there another term for picture graph?
So I would
picture
probably
graph.
want to go to Stephanie and ask them what they're actually teaching, because I remember when we got to like 5th grade and we kept saying line plot, and so I would probably want to go back to the math specialist and see what is being taught at the 2nd grade level, and if it is only bar graph, then I would probably just put bar graph.
What if we just change the word to creating and then had you take it back? I just want to make sure that would satisfy board member Cannon's
Well,
concerns.
not really, because it has nothing to do with a computer.
Okay.
Well,
But if we take it back,
I mean, these are computer science standards.
I think it does, Jen.
Should be talking about.
When I look at it, it doesn't say computer specifically, but if I'm teaching computer science and I read this,
I'm a computer
students
science
will
teacher.
collect and present data in various visual formats, such as creating a picture graph. I'm automatically
I
going to think
automatically
that they're
went to the
creating it
computer.
on the computer. That's just my opinion.
But the writing team's going to be looking at it, and then we can see what they did to see if, I don't know, just a
Well,
thought.
and I guess they don't say anything about computers in
But
the first
if you
3
say
grades,
draw-
and then they
if
say
it
a
says
lot
drawing,
about
I'm going to think
great
it's
stuff.
on paper.
Me too,
But
but
if
as soon as it says creating,
I'm going to find it.
Because I look at it kind of like as I'm developing the elementary keyboarding standards in grades K through 2, it's more of introducing them to the computer. They're not really necessarily starting to actually type until grade 3, because we want them to have that foundation of understanding, and plus their little itty bitty hands, it's just, they can't. So grade 2, it's not, or grades K through 2, it's not about the actual physical doing it and things like that. It's getting them comfortable with it, understanding how a computer works, and then in grades 3, they're actually starting to produce.
Well, you know my feelings. You've heard my inputs. I think we should have these more aligned to interacting with digital technologies,
So-
even for kids young.
As we started to create these actually do align to the K-12 computer science. So we took the K-12 computer science standards, and we've documented on that, and we've aligned them somewhat to those and then adapted them for Utah. And so looking at what other states are aligning and looking at what K-12 computer science is doing, that kind of helped us determine, okay, what is it that is age appropriate in that sense too.
I kind of feel like we start maybe in 3rd grade, and we don't do anything much at all before then.
So, board member Cannon, thank you for your input, because I think that it's very important, because as we read any of these things, then if one person thinks it that way, then we need to make sure that we're clear on these standards, so we provide that consistency across the board. So in looking at where we're at with the course revision process, which thank you for uploading into there, so it's a 5-step process. Right now we're on step 2, which is courses submitted to board for approval of 30, where we're at. We did the.
So we're actually on number 5. We revised it. So technically 4, because I would just.
Because it goes so much faster. Yeah, we just had the 30-day review.
So we're revising
Oh,
based
had
on.
the public review.
So revising based on public input, which is what you're just doing now, and these are the revised ones based on
Yes.
public input.
Okay.
So at this point in time, before they're brought back, it's an action item to move to number 5, correct? So with that action item to move to number 5, at the committee at this time, we can have it be that you work specifically to include language that is, so you can approve the standards with the recommendation that language is changed in this one area so that it reflects board member Cannon's needs if that can be done. And then that way you can also be working with the content level specialist to make sure that it's appropriate for the progressions in mathematics and computer science and meet the needs that it's very clear to anyone reading it that it's about digital resources as well as in this is all.
That's a great motion.
Someone took care of me today, and so
You're on the move.
I'm good. I got this.
That motion, that beautiful motion, that reflects what you're after, board member King, correct?
Exactly.
So, would you like to state that, or shall we?
You're accepting it.
Yeah. So you're going to forward to the board. Well, I'll let you try it. Yeah, you said you got it in there.
All right, so let's see. We are asked here to approve draft 2 of the K-5 computer science standards with the caveat that
I love that word. I know. I knew you should do it.
That grades K through 2 undergo some revision towards a more digital emphasis on the standards.
Okay. And it's probably okay to say it a little informally. So the motion before the committee is to approve the K through 5 computer science standards draft 2 with the caveat that grade 2 reflects
grades K through
2, excuse me. That grades K through 2 reflect the digital emphasis and board member Cannon's concerns. Is that?
I think we have to list what the concerns are.
Okay.
Okay.
So for Ashley's benefit and for the minutes benefit, concern that.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that
the emphasis is on actually using the computer.
Right. The emphasis is on actually using the computer as like was stated before. So this is something that's in mathematics. Okay, let's take that
and
mathematics and transfer it to look at it on a computer or
using appropriate digital tools.
Using appropriate digital tools, but is there also that element of making sure it's parallel with or consistent with it aligns with the progressions in math?
And that it's
I know there are some parents who have concerns that kids get too much screen time, especially the little ones, and so we don't want it to be so that there's
so
so
if
much
it's just
digital,
appropriate digital tools.
Yeah, so that it's, you know what I mean, we're not overdoing it.
Yeah.
Ashley,
and that's why I think in grades K through 2 we try to limit it.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's also this is the beginning, and so schools that are just beginning this, we didn't want to overwhelm them with devices, and because some teachers don't necessarily know how to do it. So that's the next step is creating.
Somebody said
Do you, Bridget? Do you want to come to the table and say something? Do you have input?
Sorry, I heard a comment behind me.
Okay, I shouldn't be making comments under my breath, but so Bridget Gerard, USBA. I understand both points here, but I do know that there are parents who are very concerned about too much computer usage by kids, especially in the younger grades, and there are teachers that are still learning these skills. So I understand both sides, but it is a computer
science
standard. So I understand both sides. So I think it's kind of difficult. But and also when I hear the word create, I think of computer. But I also want to make sure that I give the freedom to the teachers to be able to use the computer, or maybe an old-fashioned method that they liked. But since it is a computer class, I don't know, it's hard. But I do hear the same concern from parents that they think that we're using computers too much.
Well, and there's also, again, the issue that Ashley brought up, that not all first, second grade, kindergarten classes have the technology that we need.
Exactly.
Or available.
Exactly.
Available, yeah.
Exactly. So, kind of a hard issue, but that's why you guys are there and I'm in the back.
Oh, that's great.
But parents are concerned about that, definitely.
Thank you for that. Jennifer, you have
Yeah, I was to add maybe a layer of complexity.
Oh, great.
In K1 2, getting kids to log on to the computer takes a very long time.
Yes.
It's a training thing. They are more than capable, and we actually have to convince teachers that they are more than capable of logging onto a computer. But in the first few weeks, it takes 30 minutes to get a class of first graders to log onto a computer. So the loss of instructional time is a little severe.
An old person.
Just think of 30 of them.
A long time for a little kid.
Yeah, and so using the devices, I think access to this might be more having the teachers model how you use these digital tools. So when they get to 3, 4, 5, they have experience with those tools, but they aren't necessarily the ones always navigating the tools. So it might be a balance of teachers modeling with and when I'm able that the kids interact. But you want to see the tool in action so kids see how these tools can be used to represent information or data. But the ownership is probably a little bit more on the teacher end in K2 and moving towards independence in 3, 4, 5. You know way more in this area than I do, so feel free to combat that in any way. But that would be my suggestion: is how do we read that?
Point. So, on Standard 1, DA1, students will collect information and decide how to present data in various visual formats. Tally marks, color blocks, stacks, sticky notes. Couldn't we say something about being presented digitally in some kind of digital format? Because these are computer science standards.
Yeah, so kind of to piggyback off of what Jennifer said too, is that I think that in the K2 area, you would have the kids collecting the data, you would have the kids creating it, paper source is how I'm going to say it, and then the teacher may have a spreadsheet that says, okay, what goes in this cell, what goes in this cell, and then creates it, and the teacher is creating it.
Yes.
And stuff like that. Like,
what if
I'd love that.
You have many good questions. I appreciate that for the day.
So I'm kind of trying to reflect what's going on here. What if it said, students will collect and present data in various visual formats using digital tools as appropriate. Just add that phrase, using digital tools, because like Patty brought out, their little hands, or sometimes it's just using a GPS, or sometimes it's using another tool that focuses on digital tools, not necessarily the computer or the keyboard to practice typing anyway. So then it would say using digital tools as appropriate, such as drawing a picture graph, a bar graph. I mean, we could still creating. I still like creating.
We could even say having the teacher and or the students using digital tools.
Well, how we do it, because they're supposed to be what students learn.
Yeah.
We generally will do with like prompting or support, or with support the students will do this. That means the teacher can model and do it with them.
Using digital tools as appropriate and with support.
Yeah, student standards we don't typically say what the teacher would do, but with support could work. Like we're not expecting a kindergartner to bounce out.
Okay, let me just state
Maybe we could.
the motion that
in the long run.
Janet has channeled into my mouth. I mean, and if I haven't, Janet, you're going to de-channel it, if that's even a word. Okay, so the motion for the committee is to change the line, starting with students will collect and present data in various visual formats, and adding this, using digital tools as appropriate and with support, such as creating, instead of drawing, a picture graph and a bar graph with single unit scale.
Sounds good to me.
How does that feel, everyone?
It feels fine.
May I give one suggestion?
Jennifer.
Just put
the
with support at the beginning. With support, do all of those.
Yes, you're right. That's actually better.
Because kindergartners graphing is.
So wait.
This is
second grade. Wait.
Oh, okay.
The beginning of it, with support.
But with support,
I'm going to start
the digital device part.
I just want to make a point. You're saying something about one specific standard, but I read another one where the same kind of thing could be incorporated. So on these lower grade levels.
So to review the K through 2 standards,
Yeah.
making sure there's an emphasis on using appropriate digital tools with support. Now, I think in second grade,
What if we said using or demonstrating digital tools? Because if there's something, even if the teacher demonstrates.
Please. Oh yes, I was daydreaming.
So I'm thinking about the evaluation and assessment of a standard. So if the standard is stating with support, then we've just set the ceiling out with support. And so what we want to do is to be able to differentiate between different levels of student achievement at what mastery means. So in mastering this standard, are we saying that they've mastered it if they do it with support? Or is the goal of the standard for them to be able to do this on their own? Perhaps introducing the standard with support aided by
That's the sidebar I was having. I was like, maybe there's an age you do want them able to do it.
So maybe it is, and so that I mean, we don't want to put this in there, but it's using an appropriate pedagogical,
Actually, just a question from Board Member Hanson. I mean, she can say it, but are we under a time crunch? Can we send it back to the writing committee to maybe incorporate these ideas or concerns?
Not necessarily, but one thing I was thinking is that the next step after or when these get approved is that we will start creating
core guides.
Core guides, thank you. I was like, what's the name for it? Core guides that will help teachers present, and that is where we could go more in depth of here's a way to teach it, and then the professional development comes around. So even though it doesn't say it in here, with the core guides and the professional development that we'll provide for teachers, that's a way that we could say, hey, here's a way to incorporate. And so there's another toss-up, sorry.
Here's how you support.
Yeah.
Here's how you use digital tools as appropriate.
Perhaps you want to take it back to committee as stated previously, work through some of these things and then bring it back next month. And then you can have maybe some of those options of what it would look like in a core guide, perhaps what it would look like in the standard itself.
Okay.
So why don't we do that?
So do you want to just focus on K2?
No,
or
I just like that. No, thank you. Do you want to just focus on K through 2?
Yeah, K2 was where I had most of the hard.
It's a hard space.
It is a hard space, but we also
they're more than capable of it. It's just figuring how to get them back.
Oh, yeah, I think that's where that's at.
So we'll look at creating a meeting or whatnot. And
oh, that's great.
And stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
We're a fun group.
Thank you.
Do you now understand why this is the funnest group? Is we can impart about the details of the second.
It's still coming out friendly.
Yes.
And
I'm noticing we have some new visitors that we did have introduced. I bet you that they had no idea that we looked at this level of what a second grader learns in computer science. Yeah.
Welcome. We'll introduce you in a minute. Stay tuned. Okay. So is that good?
Yeah,
We've
so
got it down.
clarification. So focus on K2 right now, working on incorporating more digital tools with support. Do we want not the support?
I would say if possible. I mean,
Ask them about that.
If I feel like if it's just gonna mess up all the teachers.
Well, and here's the thing: all teachers get support. It doesn't matter what they're teaching.
Yeah, exactly.
But if the standard has with support, then that's the bar. But good teaching means
The question
support.
is, what level do you want them to require? Like, are they supposed to digitally graph on their own in kindergarten?
Yeah.
Or is that given some level of support? Not saying a teacher wouldn't get support.
They all can draw or create a graph
Absolutely.
on their
But
own.
when you say digital, like present digitally, that to me is a different.
And I've seen second graders create the graphs by
Oh,
just
second grade.
rolling over. They just
It's
pull over
kindergarten.
everything.
Even
and
kindergartners could do
this
it
is second grade.
If I have enough
Practice
practice.
with support.
I think I know.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Sure, why not? If not, I'll come back.
Thank you so much.
Come back
you.
anyway.
Yeah. Come back.
Only if you bring treats.
We've got bins.
We have a lot of donuts in my side of the house today. Like 4 different people brought them to wander through.
Good to know.
Okay, if it's okay with everyone, I think we're going to move down to action 8. Is that okay with you, Jennifer?
Absolutely.
You're here all the
Wherever
time. You don't leave me. Which is kind of exciting because we have some visitors and guests and members of our Student Advisory Council. So it's item number 8, USB Student Advisory Council recommendations. And I was so excited to read through the recommendations. I'm excited to hear from you guys. And I don't know how you want to format this, but I'll let Jeff start us off, and then our guests will introduce themselves and
Sure.
go from there. Talk to us.
Introduction. So I love doing rules, but this is why I always say this is the favorite part of my job. Because I get to interact with actual students and learn from them about their experience as they see it. But I don't come from an education background, so I often reflect back on what I did 17 years ago as a senior in high school, which I would hope is different today than it was 17 years ago. So these guys have been totally enlightening my mind as to what school is like today, and it has been a really, really fun time getting to know all of the students on the council and how they feel about certain aspects of their education. Board Member Hanson has been to all of our meetings actually and has seen the amazing work that these students are up to. You've got before you the 6 recommendations that they made. We will go through those one by one and kind of discuss ideas from the board. To keep in mind all of the action items that are available to you, or options I should say. You could pass it, move it to the board as written, you could amend it, you could also send it back to the council if you'd like more feedback on, well, what do you think, flesh this idea out more, come back to us in a month or 2 months, whatever it may be. Like, sky's the limit on your options. But I will not take too much time talking right now, as I do want to introduce Brendan and Tan. They are from District 13 and 3. So you are with Board Member Hanson, and yours, I believe, is Scott Nelson.
Okay.
They're representing today. Brendan is returning because they're 2-year terms on the council, so he'll be here this next year. Tan has graduated, and I'll let him kind of both of them introduce themselves and where they're going with their lives and all the stuff that they do, and then we'll dive into the meat. But feel free to introduce yourselves and then a little bit about your experience on the Student Advisory Council first.
My name is Tan. I am from Taylorsville High School. I recently graduated this May, and I'm attending the University of Utah. A little bit about why I joined the council was like, as I spent time in classes and saw everybody and interacted with all the honor students, I felt like there was a sense of disengagement between the teachers and students, and I really wanted to take that word up to say something about it, because there's been kind of this lingering aroma around all of the students that, man, this is getting kind of mundane and kind of So I wanted to speak on that and make something more active and more engaging.
And I'm Brendan Murphy. I go to Mazer Prep in Linden. It's a charter school. And thank you. That's great. I'll be a senior next year, getting ready to apply for college. I first heard about the opportunity to be on the council on KSL, actually. I just thought it would be a great opportunity because I'm really interested in public policy and especially educational policy. And both my parents actually are professors at BYU.
Oh, wow.
And so I've always kind of been in the educational community. And I'm really interested in humanities education, especially as it integrates with technological education. So that's the main reason I decided to join.
So with that, we can kind of dive into these.
We just want to. What did you think about our last discussion? Do you have any input on that? just quickly before we get into it.
It was really detailed.
Like we get down to the.
Yeah. Because words matter and
yes.
it's not specific.
Yes.
And that's
it's up to
every content area in our subject.
So next time you look at a standard, you're going to think, gosh, each word took 30 minutes. Words, but then some.
So with that, we can go through the recommendations, and you guys can just jump in at any point that you feel like I want to expand on this particular recommendation about what the council was seeking. Again, these are all 6 different recommendations. The council we began in November, so this was the first time that we were created. So we didn't get the full school year. So this upcoming school year will be our first full school year. And put it on your calendars if anyone wants to join next Friday, all day, 9 to 4. We're having a training at the Capitol with the new council, with all the new members and those returning who are able to attend. We'll be going over lots of different things. Linda's actually going to be presenting in the morning to us, so you can come cheer her on. But they broke themselves off into 4 different subcommittees. There were other subcommittees that they had, and they narrowed down on 4 in the end, and they centered around standards and assessments. So this is the perfect committee for that. Minority inclusivity, school safety, and mental health. So those are going to kind of be the themes you see in these recommendations coming out. So the first one actually came from a group that Tam was the chair of, the Standards and Assessments Subcommittee, actually co-chair with Brendan. They were co-chairs together. The first 2 actually came from this committee. The first one being seeking board approval to send an open letter to LEAs requesting less time on benchmark assessment and more time on engaged learning. So there were some definitely strong feelings from this group about the amount of time they were tested, but maybe I'll toss it to you guys if that's okay about some of your feelings on that and why you thought this would be a good approach.
So with mine, it's I've spent like between 9th grade and 12th grade, I was tested like almost like every other week, and just that constant reminder of, oh, there's a test next week, oh, there's a test this week, like it really kind of demoralized me to go to school, because it's like all I'm doing is just absorbing facts at this point, and I don't feel like I know who's teaching me, and I don't know like the interactions that they have, of civil discourse, and so when I felt like as a student, when we focused so much on testing, we weren't able to talk to each other and see each other as humans. We almost saw each other as almost like robots, and we're not. So I just felt like we needed to kind of remove ourselves from such standardizations, look at each other as colleagues and one another instead of just professor and as a hierarchy. So.
And one thing that we discussed a lot as a council is the different powers held by the board versus a local board. And one of the conversations we got into with assessment was who's in charge of assessments. And we actually had a great meeting. Ken and I met with Karen back in December to kind of go through statutory requirements for testing on a statewide level, and then what LEAs are authorized to do. Coming to discover myself as well that at a state level, you actually don't have a lot of requirements for testing. There is the big test, obviously, but a lot of the benchmark testing is dictated at the school or the LEA level. So that is the context in which this recommendation came, was we're recognizing as a student council that some of our school districts and schools are really getting heavy on the benchmark testing, and we would like to do more engaged learning than the benchmark testing.
Will you define what you mean by benchmark testing?
So I actually might defer to Jennifer on this, as we've talked a lot about benchmark testing. She rolls her eyes. She's like, of course, you pull me in.
Hide out until it's my turn.
You like it, sort of.
Yeah, I'm very verbose. It's fine.
You mean loquacious?
Yes. That's a better yes.
So in terms of benchmark testing,
we were talking about wanting to sit in on the council, and that.
Oh, you
can learn
totally
from the children.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
what's a benchmark?
In terms of benchmark testing, this is how I have understood it, and as we've discussed it at the council. Yeah, just assessing where students are at. So teachers want to know where they're at any given point with what they're accomplishing. I think the fear is, at what point does benchmark testing become a test for test's sake, and when is it data that's actually going to be used?
And Tam, you're using it in terms of like it's a computer test, not like in a general term like how teachers take benchmarks every day from even civil discourse. But you're talking specifically a computer.
Well, and it's probably not even it could be paper based.
Yeah.
But just the unit test, the weekly test, or we made it through this 2 weeks of instruction. Let's see what you learned.
Yeah.
Probably very unlikely that they actually took that to change their instruction next week based on what they learned from your assessment. And so it's the power of the point of the benchmark is to say, what do you know now so I can inform my instruction moving forward? Most of these are more summative assessments that we finish the end of a unit and let's see what you learned from that unit but generally instruction is probably not being altered based on that. Yeah.
Or teachers will use it as practice. They feel like the more you practice, the better you'll be. That's what I see, and it gets robotic, like you're saying.
Well, I think the intention of assessment is to inform teachers so they can change instruction, and in this case, I don't think that's what the children are saying, the students. Sorry, you're way older than the kids I serve. I call them children, but you're not children.
I hope that answers the question. Gives an
Yeah,
idea of
that's helpful, because in my mind I'm thinking, okay, well, we can't do away with the end of year testing that the state relies on to report to the federal government to get us on $223 million in federal aid. You know, we can't do away with that. But this probably would be the venue at the option of individual teachers.
Yeah.
And how much is formative and how much formative is necessary.
And we did a study at the state level many years ago when state assessment became kind of more aware in the public of how much testing was happening in local level versus the state assessment. And when you combine all those, it's a lot of hours being spent being assessed, and those hours of assessment, if used well, can be powerful for instruction. And I think it's helping teachers to understand, if you're going to assess, how do we use that data to change instruction so that students show more competency and have those opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge in ways besides paper and pencil pieces. And so potentially with this one coming, generally I don't think the board has done the open letter concept, something for you all to consider, but we have done resolutions in the past where we clearly state, here's best guidance around what we might suggest, although we, control-wise, there's no code or anything in this space, but that might give some opportunity for local boards to consider their own policies around assessment.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
I have a question. When you say too much testing, what do you think would be an interval time that you could say would be satisfactory to you guys to be tested? Because I do know, having worked with my assessment director in my district, that they are doing just exactly what she said. They are adjusting the curriculum. Okay? Johnny didn't get it, but Susie, Billy, so on and so, all of them did. Okay, let's work on Johnny. What's his issue? Why is he struggling with this that we're learning? But if they give the test and Johnny, Billy, Susie, everybody but maybe Scott didn't get it, then the teacher needs to go back and say, okay, let me reteach that in a different way. So they are, some of them are using it for that purpose, to adjust so that they know that you do that. But at the same time, like you said, it's every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. When do you think is a good time period for them to be able to take a minute to say, okay, how are we doing? Are they following? Do they understand? Because if we give a test at the first of the year, and then you give one at the end, we're diagnosing why you died if you flunked, rather than diagnosing that you're having a problem during the school year, and let us help you adjust that so we can catch that now, so we can heal you and make you successful at the end. So what span do you think would be?
So I believe it would be every quarter, because at a high school level, we have 8 classes, and with each 8 classes, the weekly testing is almost weekly and almost or every other day. So I think if we could, space it out, or not space the testing out, but kind of condense testing into maybe a quarterly type of time frame, it would not make us take a test every single week or day.
And from my impression, the tests we're talking about aren't necessarily teacher-created tests. I haven't actually taken these tests, but I've heard from Tan and others that you're Granite District.
Yeah, Granite School District.
They're actually like district-mandated tests that are required, or even school-wide tests are required. And so, I don't think we have so much of a problem with teachers setting benchmarks and learning from those. But these more strictly mandated tests that aren't really effective on a classroom level.
Thanks for bringing this, because it's always nice to hear from the customer. And so basically, there's a lot that's done here, and objectives, policies, rules. There's a lot that happens at the State Board of Education. And there's a lot that happens at the local level. And there's a lot that happens at your school. and then it gets down to what the teachers do, and then you guys are the customer who is experiencing all of these things put together collectively. So really, this is the customer experience that we're hearing. So with that in mind, there's some key words in here that spark different things. So when we just started the conversation before, words are so important. And so when we look at this, some of the words that are really important in here that would have to have defined meanings, so they would mean something different to different people, is one, if I don't even look at that and I start to talk about what Board Member Marsh was just talking about and what Board Member Cannon was talking about a minute ago, which is if something is given to you that is to assess your learning, do you ever feel that some of it is given to you to assess the teaching, to change what is happening, which means that you're not receiving a grade. So there's different kinds of things. When you're taking these benchmark tests that you're given, do you feel as a customer that it's assessing your performance, or do you feel that it is something that is changing the teaching? And usually a trigger to that is whether you're graded.
I think I would have to probably go with the second option. But I feel like it's a little bit of each, a little bit of both. Because when we get tested, yes, it reflects us on how much we studied and worked on. But if we have a teacher who comes to us who only has taught us through PowerPoint and, kind of, this one dimension type of teaching, it not only reflects on the teacher, but also on how we get to learn from that, or how do we get assessed from that.
So one of the examples, please. So one of the examples that Board Member Gravitt was up here giving was one of the ways that she assesses students is through the Socratic method and having these discussions. And having these discussions, she can know where her students are and how to adjust her lesson for the next day. That technically is a benchmark for her, how she uses it. So maybe our term isn't about the benchmark itself, but about the utilization of information gained and how it's used. So I think, and so this is what I'm trying to think of. If you were to put that down so it's detailed and meant the same thing to everyone, if you talk about it in such a way that you don't want to waste your time as a student. I'm going like pendulums many here so you can pull me back to what you really mean. It's actually a good way of, like, I didn't mean that at all. Don't waste my time as a student giving you my time in doing something and giving me no feedback, but just moving forward. And so I'd rather be engaged in the learning process itself and be continuously learning than constantly doing a task that I'm receiving no feedback on.
Right. And that's what you need.
So maybe it's more about feedback and the purpose of assignments and reflection than it is about the benchmark testing. Because you're saying that benchmark testing is taking the time of this engaged learning. So what maybe you're really asking for is more engaged learning and that opportunity to get more feedback so you can personally reflect on your own learning.
And that's between conversation as well. And so with testing is we have lost that sense of conversation because I've had teachers, they just do PowerPoint all day. They don't talk to us as students, understand us as students, no matter how busy we are.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like, oh, they want to see high test scores for maybe their own purposes, but we don't get to talk to them and see that they're really a teacher who cares for us, not just as a person that just spews out facts. Because as a student, I've seen, in my perspective, there are teachers who are like that, and I only see them as fact spewers for a grade, for a test, and I don't want that to be.
And
I
you
want
yourself
them to know.
don't want to be a fact spewer. You want to discuss things.
Yeah, I want to talk about things and develop ideas to be able to think about them. So I feel like just the way that maybe assessments are is that lack of conversation.
Yeah, just that institutionalized approach can damage our learning environment.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe on this one,
Let you refine it.
Well, yeah, to take it back and maybe have someone from teaching and learning go in, or there's lots of people who want to go in now, just so you know. Robert Austin probably referred to me, right?
We were both
And,
like,
yeah,
when can we come?
yeah, and to be able to say, what is it that you truly want? Because I think that if we were just to do this one thing, less benchmark testing, then the culture that's in the classroom is what you're stating right there. This might be a variable that causes that. But what you're really asking is for something much deeper than that. So maybe to work on this recommendation, to have it state what you really want it to say.
Because it can be interpreted so differently in districts.
What do you want instead of benchmark testing?
So
Like
what I'm
you-
hearing
yeah,
is
go ahead.
you're suggesting that we take this back to the committee and discuss a little bit more so that we don't send out an open letter that could be misunderstood.
Misinterpreted. Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Linda Hanks, did you want to come up to the table
Yeah,
for a second?
well, there's not, can I sit here?
I guess, yes, you can.
So,
Oh, there
local
it
board
is.
member Linda Hanks from GUAB, and first of all, let me say, I'm really excited my daughter's going to have an opportunity now to work on representing you. Totally different perspective, because as I'm here listening to this conversation, first of all, thank you students for what you're recommending. And as I looked at this and read through this, because I'm looking parent, teacher comes out, school board member comes out, and I thought, you know what, as a local board member, what I would take from this, if I were to skip this, is to take it back to our student advisory committee and say, look, these are some recommendations that came out of the state student advisory committee. What do you think about this as it relates to GUAB School District or as it relates to Davis School District? Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's not because Granite School District or Davis School District or GUAB or Tintic, they're all so different in how they identify or how they're even assessing their in so many different levels of competency-based, standards-based. So the conversations that are occurring with students at Mazer Prep are different than what's occurring at Granite School District, at Cypress High School, or at even Skyline. You know what I'm saying? And that's where those, but how valuable is that for a local board to pull in that student voice at their local level? And these conversations are occurring even as we look at providing some leadership training to our local school board members. These conversations are occurring. How do we get that student voice? What are the students saying? And that's how this would come in. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I kind of hear you saying instead of like dictating less time on this or making it prescriptive, you say have a conversation about
so it's not really
benchmark testing or whatever versus engaged learning.
So it's not really changing what the recommendations
Exactly.
are,
Is
because
that-
these are recommendations that came from this student to you guys. How do we get that to our local boards, our local districts, local LEAs to really implement? Because you're talking about how, and remember boards, even at a local board member, we're the why, we're not the how, but what the students are talking about is how are we receiving the information? So as a local board member, I'm not going to come in and say, do it this way, do it this. I'm going to say, here's the why, and let's get it down to the teacher level to change at the how
That's
level.
what you're asking to have the conversation, correct? And then we'll go to Bridget after. You wanted to respond to that?
So that rough letter we wrote, we were pretty cognizant about not directing it towards any
We don't have a letter. Have
form.
you written a letter?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. And send that to the board. Yeah.
So
Not today, obviously, but yeah.
But we've written kind of an open letter, kind of maybe rough draft open letter that the way that we have it is we're not directing it towards any certain form of government. We're directing it towards the individual itself and what they can do as an educator, a person in power.
Oh, I would love to see that letter. Bridget Shorty.
Yeah, I think what Linda's saying and what these guys are recognizing and what we're all realizing is we can use the input that they've given as a catalyst to make things happen in each district and make these LEAs aware that they need to be paying attention to the students in their district. And I know our district has added another student board member. So we have two. We have a young man and a young woman on our board. And I think the LEAs, when they see what they've done, it'll be a catalyst to make them think, oh, okay, we need some more input from our students. So that's what we're all saying. I think that's the point. So really appreciate what they're doing.
Linda?
I was going to say, and I would like for all of these to go to the board before we
Me too.
Just so the full board can see.
Which that might even be, the motion is to, move the discussion to the full board, or, I don't know, we can decide that later, but we could just go on and on. I wonder, does that help you express the first one? Are you ready to move to the second one, or Jeff, were you going to say something?
Sure, I can walk us quickly through. The testing one was one of the heavier ones that came from the council.
I think it's really valid, a great discussion.
The second one was actually recommending to the board revisiting standards of 2 core subjects, English language arts and social studies. The students felt that these subjects needed a revamp of some kind, or the standard needed to be looked at again.
And I think they'll feel better because Jennifer will tell them, when are those coming up?
But we're here for it, right?
Yeah. And this is right in line with kind of one of the avenues in which the board considers a subject matter in which they want to open the standard. So the students are suggesting these are 2 areas that they feel could get a facelift. And I can hand it to you guys in terms of why, or certain elements of each of why you think it should be opened.
And that's with Brendan.
Yeah, for sure. So you were actually talking about the Socratic method and how you use that to analyze your students' progress. And we found that a lot of the time students aren't able to effectively present themselves in a manner that's civil. And we can see that on a national level as well, and at the state level. And so we'd like to see, especially in these subjects, because we feel that's a proper area to address these issues. Using the Socratic method was actually mentioned, and other discussion methods to increase the ability of students to engage in civil discourse.
Any other questions? Should we go on to number 3?
Yep. Number 3.
We are revising.
Yes, we are.
Yes, they're actually going to they're up next.
On deck.
So the timing is perfect. The next one is to recommend that the board instruct its staff to provide best practices trainings to school counselors, ensuring minority student access to college and career readiness resources. The Minority Inclusivity Subcommittee, and Rachel was not able to make it today. She was going to try and make it and had car trouble. But the big thing that came from this committee about this issue was their feeling that a lot of underprivileged and underrepresented students are not getting the same level of attention from school counselors and not being told what resources are available to them on an equitable basis. And so there's a lot of concern from the students that the low-income student from a minority background is being dismissed or considered less or not told about scholarship opportunities for whatever reason, and wanted to make sure that there is a best practices in place that making its way down to the school counselors, that we need to make sure equity is at play when we are considering all of these things for career college readiness. I don't know if any of you had more to add to that. So that's the third one.
And current status on that one.
Yes.
We are working on this. So as part of the board recommendations for improving access to early college coursework for underrepresented groups, which is what this sounds similar to me, so feel free to clarify if I'm misinterpreting. We are developing a best practices kind of toolkit for educators and counselors to think about what students' skill sets might we have to develop, how might we support so that all students can be successful in those early college courses, and that recruitment efforts are more targeted towards students that have been underrepresented in those groups. And so the board rule 707 that you guys approved recently helps us move down that pathway, but we have some other pieces as part of, I think we ended up with 16 recommendations to the board that the board said yes. So we have this one's a higher priority of those 16 of trying to get something out. So there are some resources being dedicated to this space.
Do we have any ability to do anything with concurrent enrollment?
It's one of our board requests that you breezed through last night.
I've had several people talk to me about concurrent enrollment. Everybody in concurrent enrollment.
We want to do something similar with the AP that we did with AP in the CE space to encourage that underrepresented group, because CE actually has some great pathways in for the career part of the house as well, where AP is a lot more college-bound orientation, but CE gives you many pathways. And so part of the business cases, we also have the legislative request of some amendments to concurrent enrollment to better address the underrepresented student population. So that will be something as we get further into those legislative requests with you, you'll get to see and give some further input.
Before Janet asks, does some of these conversations help you feel a little better, or is that kind of addressing some of your concerns? Okay, Board Member Cannon.
I just have a comment. So I got to be, and it was a privilege to be on a task force for English language learners. If you may not know, but the kids in our schools that are learning English are the lowest performing group of any of our students across the state. They have the most problem. So they brought in to show us some of the administration from Davis School District who has had huge success working with their English language learners. And they told us about a program where at a district level they started to take responsibility for each of these kids. And they utilized their counselors, and the counselors were to meet with these kids 4 times a year and see what they could do and how they could help them. And they have had dramatic success improving the scores and the graduation rates of these kids. So I think you guys are spot on when you're talking about we need our school counselors to help some of these kids. And one of the themes that is coming across to me is something that we've addressed in our strategic plan, and that's every kid in the state of Utah needs some personalization to their education. You need to know somebody cares about you enough to give you feedback on your test. You know, somebody cares about you enough to counsel you into some of these programs that might better your life. So, spot on, guys.
And number 4 seems pretty
Number
similar
4.
to number 2 a little bit.
Yes, very much related to number 2. This also came from the Minority Inclusivity Subcommittee. In looking at specifically history and social studies, they wanted to recommend that when that gets opened and revisited, that other cultures, ethnic, and regional histories outside of a Eurocentric history get included. They feel that the history that's being taught is very Eurocentric and is ignoring many other cultures and regions of the planet. They'd like
And
to
I
see
say
that.
that with literature as well. Okay, Patty?
One of the things you have is the specialist over there in this room right now, listening to the comments.
Oh,
And so he's, in case you guys didn't know, Robert is the social studies specialist. That is his area.
Blame me, sorry.
Oh, they will.
So having him here and hearing that is very
I
good.
appreciate it. I'm really just delighted.
It's so great.
It's a real civics. It's civics in action.
Yeah.
In what you're doing. And I mean, I'm not at the committee, but I'm hopeful that LEAs are also having student advisory councils. And if they don't, that they should. I think. It's great.
I've got to tell you, one time when we were interviewing for the superintendent, one of the interviewees that came in said something that's kind of stuck with me, and he was talking about he was a minority himself and had come from Polynesian, some kind, Samoan, and he said, you know, my daughter, when she goes to social studies class, she has to do a report on Iowa. He said, I'd like her to do a report on where we're from instead of, so she can learn something about her heritage and her culture instead of always having to do a report on, Iowa. So I think that's kind of what these guys are.
I grew up in Iowa. I'm not sure I like
it. The 5th one, if we're okay to move forward.
Yes, please.
Seek board approval. This is another open letter recommendation to LEAs encouraging a revamp of Hope Squads. This came from the Mental Health Subcommittee. The concern is Hope Squads in some LEAs, and the students were very candid about the fact that this is not universal, that some LEAs are doing it very well and some schools and LEAs are not. But in some areas it's becoming very much suicide focused and turning into report these students when you think they might be a threat, and they're very concerned that they're feeling responsible for the mental health of their peers, and that is not what they feel Hope Squad should be. So they want whatever Hope Squad is to the LEAs and whatever element and programs they put into that to be more positive and peer-focused rather than strictly about reporting students they feel are at threat of suicide. I don't know if you guys want to add more to that.
And with that, would it be more service-based, or do you guys have thoughts on that?
We weren't involved in this specific one, but in the discussion, they've mostly focused on peer support.
Okay.
They had some really strong opinions on Hope Squads when I was there listening to them. I wish Christy was here because I know that that's one thing that she feels is a very positive thing, but generally I think probably 2/3 of the kids did not feel like it was positive in their schools. I mean, there were a couple of them who were from rural schools who felt like they were really positive, but a lot of the kids felt like they were popularity contests. They really didn't help each other. They didn't, they were just not what they had hoped they would be. They didn't feel like they were giving them the support they needed, and people didn't really want to go talk to them. Or
Gosh, that's so going to depend on the
It was
school,
more a
because I've
popularity
seen, like, in our school, it's great, because it is focused on peer support, and I mean, maybe I go to the kids.
I was going to say that might be your perception. You might
Yeah, and that's what I was going to
Yes.
say. I mean, I have, but maybe I need to dig into that a little further. So thank you for that perspective.
So whether the board considers an open letter, resolution, or some recommendations to LEAs about if you're doing Hope Squad, please make sure you have some best practices in place.
Right.
Something
And
to
it's not
consider.
just another.
Go ahead. I'm wondering, I always like to think about things in an inclusive manner, and then we state one thing, but then make so that we would not include someone else in the conversation. So there's other clubs besides Hope Squad that are similar and might have similar ways of doing or being. So if we just say Hope Squad, then they can say, no, not me, we're doing fine. So if we could create some type of wording within there that states, clubs like, or you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, and Jeff did say like a Hope Squad or another, I forgot how you phrased it.
Yeah, and then and I think that you and I were talking about was it the Golden Gate. Yeah, Golden Gate. There's the program that's based in Utah.
Talk to Christy too, because Christy's been working with some of those. I think I saw that one.
There might be some really good terminology in there. That would help, right, with that. That could be what you want to see more, so just not what you don't want to see, but what you want to see, what you do want to see. And then that can become very proactive.
And then the last one relates to school safety. This came from the school safety committee, and they wanted to seek board approval to disseminate a statewide student school safety survey to determine the top issues and perceptions regarding school safety. I'll add a caveat to that in terms of board work and a bill that passed and a rule that we're now writing, so this might be beautiful timing for all of us. In September, I don't want to promise it will come to this committee, but I'm pretty sure it will. You will get the school climate survey rule. House Bill 120 did require that all LEAs have a school climate survey. We're supposed to put a rule in place about the elements it needs to require, as well as create a model survey that if LEAs would like to adopt, they can adopt it. I've already actually spoken to Christy and her team about this particular recommendation and making sure that the students will get the opportunity to provide feedback on the survey and questions that will be developed, because a school climate survey goes out to the school community. It goes to parents, students, teachers, administrators to understand the perception of the school climate and culture. So this is happening. So next month you'll have a rule that, beautiful timing.
Oh,
I heard my name.
Okay. So I have a question about this one.
Go ahead.
I'm being so. So tell me, guys, was this something that you wanted your school districts to get the information, or did you want the information to go to us? What did you want to see happen after the survey?
Although we weren't specifically involved in the school safety committee, I think we were, from what I heard, it was based on their school district, because each school district is different based on their region, so whatever suits their region.
So we want information to go to their district. Not like this survey that we just did of was it principals or administrators, where all that information came to us. This would be more something that could be disseminated out to each district.
Yes, please.
Talking school climate surveys.
Oh, wonderful.
And how those are disseminated and how they look differently from other surveys that have been done.
Yes, absolutely. So to give some context around the school climate surveys, those came through as
as a shall from House Bill 120, so that every school will conduct them, whether it's one that we create or one that they already currently conduct. These go to every stakeholder. They are anonymous. So there will be a student population, parent, school staff, and school resource officer. So we'll be sure that we're getting sufficient data from each of those populations. We are currently drafting those questions. We have taken several questions and recommendations from many parties. So I know that the committee is still open to suggestions and adjustments along those lines as well.
And who receives the data? It will go to both the state and the district, correct?
Yes. Yeah, the way it's currently being formulated is through Qualtrics. And so Qualtrics will send that out. Districts will have the ability to adjust those questions as well. So if they have certain programs or things that they want to address, they'll be able to gather that data.
All right, thanks. We are looking for, this is an action item, and even if the action is just to, forward these recommendations to the full board, or if you guys want to be more specific with those. Would that be a motion? Okay, so the motion before the committee is to consider the Student Advisory Council recommendations and forward those recommendations onto the full board for more discussion. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Just so you know,
You're right, I was going to say, you hear that? You guys are superstars. Oh, thank you so much. Come again.
Thank you, guys.
We're staying for more fun. That was okay, so just want to make people mindful of the time. It's just after 3, and we have a few more to get through. Especially there's one that Leah is going to be presenting that might take a little bit of time, but I think we'll do Jennifer's number 1 now, since you're at the table. Is that okay with you?
That'd be awesome.
Okay, so as you guys know, our staff has been amazing, especially Jennifer, at working on rubrics for triggering standards revision outside the board's timeline. We asked her to take it back and look at it and fix some things or just add some things. So I'll let you go ahead and talk.
Sure. So can I just ask a preliminary question? Do you want us to look at the one that's marked a draft or draft 1?
Draft 1.
Draft 1 has the rubric below.
That's the only change. But
So everything's the same except for that one, and it's kind of nice.
Knowing that some of you may not be as familiar with the rubric, plus if it's in policy, we have to bring the rubric back to you to make changes. And so this kind of standardizes the rubric and enforces staff has to bring it to you for any further revision. So in our last meeting in June with this committee, that's mostly new, we came to the point of we're happy with where the rubric stood, but wanted to ensure that staff used the rubric on a frequent basis and brought that information to the board to then make further determinations on whether to trigger a review outside of the 7-year timeline that the board recently established for standards. So this is kind of just taking all of the efforts that have been done and putting them into a policy that enforces that staff is supposed to do something, rather than hoping that the staff does it. It's in policy and the staff will be required to do it. So it's really just standardizing the process. So we had a current board policy that talked about the Standards Review Committee. This kind of expands past that. One amendment, I would probably, just looking at it now, I had changed the name at one point because it's not just about the review committee anymore, but we'll visit that here in a minute. It was really just adding that the rubric would be part of the process of standards review. So we do have the timeline, but to ensure that we don't just rely on the timeline solely, the committee felt like we should have another mechanism for having a timely review if there was something that warranted a review outside of just a timeline. And so the rubric was the effort to kind of move towards that direction. There are other pieces that also can cue a review, but the rubric would be part of that system. And so this basically just says the board will charge the superintendent to do these annually, that we will submit a summary of the information to the board, probably to this committee, to then determine do we want to have any further discussion about queuing a revision earlier than the timeline permits. And we did a
few sample time or rubrics with the committee prior to show you social studies, language arts, and world language. Social studies on the timeline was timed this year and scored the highest, so it was kind of nice to see. The rubric seems to work. Language arts was very close behind and is queued for revision next year, so it would be kind of using that as just another tool. And world language, which was done about 3 years ago, was very low in scoring. It did not seem to need a queue review, and that 7 years would probably be an appropriate time frame at this point. And so the goal really here is just to kind of put into policy that staff will provide the rubric results to you on an annual basis, and then that you can use those results to determine if you want to queue a revision outside of the timeline process. And so the revision would be warranted either based on the timeline or that revision rubric piece. So that's kind of gives the board a little more opportunity to be flexible within when a revision could occur. And that's basic changes. The rest are just code changes because this policy hadn't been updated since code had changed. So they're just kind of crosswalking those. So that's what I have for you in terms of that. The very last page of the policy is the rubric that has been approved by this committee to be the tool that the staff would use. And then we would use that annually for each content area that is required to be reviewed and submit to those for further consideration.
And when I talked to Jennifer, she assured me that staff doesn't feel overly burdened with doing the annual review. So, because I think that would be great, but I just want to make sure we didn't do too much.
Yeah, having had the staff that did the three, I asked them how long it took, and it's not a huge burden of time. They're well aware of where their standards are and kind of
and they should be
answering these questions. So it's pretty, I can do it in a staff meeting in probably 15-30 minutes and let staff do it and have the summary to you. So if this gets approved, we'll end up doing that whatever month after it gets approved. We'll do it in staff meetings, so you'll get this year's data as soon as possible.
What questions do you have?
I don't have a question, but I just think this is wonderful.
I think it's excellent.
I think we've done such a great job, and we have been working on it for months and months and months, and this is just, the icing on top of the cake. So
it came together.
I would move that we approve board policy 3002 standards review. With the caveat that,
caveat again.
That we express our appreciation to all of those involved.
Okay.
I will let the staff know.
The motion before the committee is to approve board policy 3002. I think it's as amended, right? With the caveat of giving much gratitude and thanks to all those who worked on this. And forward that recommendation to the board.
And I hate to do this, but can we change the policy name?
We sure can. That's what as amended means.
I think we might need another amendment,
Okay.
but it says Standards Review Committee, and I had changed that in my draft. But
okay, what should it be?
I think just core revision process, core standards revision process.
Core standards revision.
Because it has the review committee in it, but that's part of the core standards revision, and so it's a more encompassing term for the policy.
Would you consider that a friendly amendment, Janet?
Yeah.
I don't know if I just said that right. Okay, so the new motion, well, I guess we can.
Standards revision.
Yeah. So the motion before the committee is to change the title from Standards Review Committee to the Core Standards Revision Process. Any discussion of that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And then we probably need to go back to the original, which was, so the motion before the committee is to approve board policy 3002 as amended with much thanks and gratitude to our wonderful staff and forward that recommendation to the board. Discussion of the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was easy.
No.
I'll change
Well,
the title.
we've done the work in the prior month.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, so we are now on number 5. Speaking of having talked about one for a long time, R277404. So Jeff, is this you?
Yes, Darren, I don't believe is here.
Yeah,
so.
that's right.
I'm here, but
Oh,
I think
Jerry.
Jeff was
fantastic.
need it, is what I was.
Okay, and as you guys know, we've been talking about this one for a long time, and we send it back, because we have to make sure it, aligns with statute. But I really like the amendment, the change with an educator may versus shall, etc. So anyway, Jeff, will you talk to us about the changes?
Yes.
And then give us questions.
So really the big change is on line 233. As you may recall, Board Member Scott Hansen requested we hold this rule to make that addition that he wanted to see. And just as background for what this rule is, this is Rule 404. It's about the statewide assessment. And House Bill 118 that passed the legislative session this year, went into effect in May, allows a teacher now to choose if they would like to use a student's score on a statewide assessment as part of the student's grade in a course. The idea of this is to incentivize students to take the statewide assessment and to also demonstrate competencies on a test that can be incorporated into an academic course that they're taking. The exact language in the statute states an educator may use the test score, right? So what you see here is an LEA shall allow. There was a little discussion in USSA about, well, statute said may, here you're saying shall, and there was a hypothetical thrown out of, well, what if the LEA does not want to allow their teachers to use a score in a student's grade, although the statute says an educator may. And as we discussed it, there were multiple people around the table, and we came to the conclusion that indeed the statute left the choice with the teacher, not with the LEA. The LEA actually was not mentioned at all in the bill in terms of what was added to the bill. And so the teachers are empowered to do this even if their LEA doesn't want them to.
Yeah. And that's the next bill. Teachers, do what you want.
Yeah. So Board Member Scott Hansen's request that this be called out was very much on point.
Yes.
We wanted to make sure the clarity was there that an LEA cannot prevent a teacher from doing this. However, the reverse is also true. An LEA can require all teachers to do this. So if they have a teacher who doesn't want to, an LEA may have the policy that we allow this. And that would not violate the statute as written. So that is some clarity on the record for anyone who wants to watch this on YouTube later. I don't know if you guys told your friends you were on YouTube. You have been recorded on the public record to let people know they can go back and watch. Post it to your social media.
The whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing. So that is essentially it. We also addressed Board Member Cannon. I don't want you to be forgotten in terms of you had a specific, I think it was line 86, if I can recall correctly, or maybe it was 186. 186. There was a grammatical issue that this area used which twice, and it became very confusing.
Oh, yes.
So we kind of rewrote that so that it would eliminate the use of at least one of the whiches and make it more clear as to what we were trying to say in that line. But those are the reasons we held it. I brought that back to you, and hopefully we were good to move forward to the full board, but welcome any questions you may have.
What questions do you have, committee?
I'd make a motion to approve it.
Okay, let me know if I say it wrong. The motion before the committee is to approve R277404. Is it draft 2, draft 1?
Draft 2.
Draft 2.
Yeah, draft 2.
First reading and forward to the board for approval. Second and final reading.
You are correct, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
I knew I was channeling you too. That's what I do. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have approved R277404. That's been through some evolution.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal for me, but House Bill already took care of it. Okay. Are you up for the next two? Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item number 6, which is R277475, Patriotic, Civic, and Character Education. It's an amendment and a continuation. I think we had this last month as well.
Correct, we held this one as well.
Yeah, so Jeff, go ahead and talk to us about it.
So context as to why this was before you last month, House Bill, now I'm forgetting, was it 141 or 140? Eliminated the eliminated the reporting requirement that was necessary for the Civic and Character Commission.
Robert, do you want to come up to the table?
Yeah, you can join.
Because it also got rid of the commission. So
they eliminated the commission.
Yeah, that's right.
Come here.
Yeah.
It eliminates the commission on Civic.
You can't report to a non-existent commission.
You're like,
I'll just sit.
okay, next.
That is correct. So House Bill 371 or 381 eliminated a bunch of boards and commissions, including this commission that was housed, I believe, in the Lieutenant Governor's office. And we also submitted a report to that commission that was talked about in this rule. So we needed to adjust the rule because no more report, no more commission. And in so doing, this rule was also in our old format, in our old style guide. So we updated the formatting. And as you may recall, one of the rules about rule writing, say that 20 times fast, is you should not restate statute for a whole host of reasons. But number one being, if you restate statute and make a slight error, you are actually rewriting statute, which you are not allowed to do. And it also creates a precedent that people believe that all they have to do is look at the rules and they get the full picture, and they skip reading statute, which you never want to encourage people to do. You want to make sure they're going to both places to get the full scope of requirements. So a lot of the deletion in this rule feels heavy-handed, but that is because this rule had a lot of copy and paste from code. So one of the reasons this rule was held is the direct statutory call-out to the Pledge of Allegiance requirement in code was not actually listed. So on line 80, you will see that we added that in so that you can look at the rule and know which piece of code to reference for the Pledge of Allegiance requirements. And then there was also a question from board member Lisa Cummins, who's no longer part of the board. She moved to Texas. She had asked that staff look at lines 63 through 73 and discuss whether or not all these forms of government needed to be defined in the rule. I will give a caveat to this discussion. As we started looking into this, I wanted to make sure the board remembers that rules are not the place we put standards. Standards are the place we put standards. And there are some random subjects that you're required by law, like financial and literacy, to actually write a rule about standards. This is not one of those areas. There is a set of social studies standards where a lot of these things are discussed. And so, no, there are not definitions that are directly provided through all of those, but we did not want the discussion to get wrapped around too much this idea of let's start regulating social studies standards in a rule when there is a social studies standards that we should be utilizing. So in that context, I'll actually pass it off to Robert to kind of answer that question if you have any other further comments.
Beautifully stated. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, this is used as language from code still, but our standards pay attention to the statutory requirements, and that's where our social studies standards pick up the ball.
Maybe do you guys have any questions for Robert or Jeff? Of course we are.
I move that we approve our 277475 draft 2 on first reading and submit to the board. Is it amended? No, it's not.
Did we continue and approve it, right?
Yes. Oh, I should have added that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's going to continue.
We added that on this time because we noticed the continuation date will be May of 2020.
Okay.
So we thought, while it's here, we might as well just knock that out now and save us time later.
As continued and ask that the board approve it on second and recommend that the board approve it on second reading.
The motion before the committee is to continue and approve our 277475 draft 2 on first reading and then forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Thank you.
I know. Okay, we have just one more? Oh, we have two more. Okay, so Corby, let's do number 9. Thank you, Corby. Oh,
Corby, you've been brave enough to sit by you all day.
I know. No, you're not. So this is another action item on human trafficking prevention training, instructional materials, and Corby, go ahead and talk to us about it.
Yes. First, my name is Corby Easton, student support prevention specialist here at Utah State Board of Education. First of all, I'd like to give you a little background to help you understand where we are today. So back in 2000 legislative session in 2014, there was a a statute that was passed to require school employees, parents, to receive child sexual abuse prevention training, and it may be provided to elementary students. And so this past legislative session, that initial law was amended and added a human trafficking prevention training component. Some of the board's requirement is to develop and create those minimum standards, but also vet vendors that can possibly provide the instruction to LEAs that it can use to train school employees, parents, and they may train elementary students. And so what I have for you today is the instructional materials for school employees and for parents. And the reason you only have the two components is these are required, and I wanted to get those out to the LEAs, because LEAs been asking, because this is a biannual requirement, and they're trying to align it with the child sexual abuse requirement as well, to be on a biannual cycle. And it's been sinking, when are those minimal expectations are going to be approved, and also we can start the vetting process for vendors. And so here are the youth serving adults, and here parents and guardians.
Okay, what questions do you have?
This is just kind of a technical question. So the title of the action item is training instructional materials. And then what we have underneath here are standards for human trafficking, parents and guardians. And so these really aren't standards. These really are instructional materials.
Yeah.
Okay. I just needed that clarification. Thank you.
Just to rename that. There's no confusion
Yeah.
with standards.
Pardon?
Would you like to vote?
There's a typo here, did you see that?
Oh,
Should say.
Yeah, I think it would do that if we clarify that these are training materials, because that's how they're written. They're not written as.
Really instructions. It's just a typo.
Okay, so did you say change the title to training materials? Is that what you said?
Yeah, because human trafficking prevention training materials, training
Instead of
instruction
standards for
materials.
human trafficking.
Yeah, so
Okay,
instead
that
of
makes
saying they're
sense.
standards, we can say they're training
You're right.
materials.
That's better. Anybody else have questions or notice anything?
I just can't visualize that.
Oh, it breaks your heart.
It was really hard to read. I
Yeah.
thought it was really hard to. I'm glad we're doing it, but it's just that it goes on.
Well, I learned some things by reading. I know now that when you spell traffic, you end it with a C, and when you spell trafficking, you add a K-I-N-G.
You don't want to mix them up.
I thought that was interesting. Also, there were some words that I didn't know and didn't find. So one was polyvictimization that's written in here. I didn't know what polyvictimization meant.
Victimize on multiple.
Can you just kind of explain that to me a little bit?
Yes. So that language came from one attorney from the Attorney General office. We just understand that when an individual
refers to having experienced multiple victimizations, such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying, and sexual violence.
Okay, so it's someone who's been abused in multiple.
Well, it's actually the result of that behavior. So the result of that is the next sentence, is that traumatization leads to changing the plasticity of the brain and a rewiring of cognitive functions. So it's just not that they've experienced many, but then they actually exhibit the behaviors that change.
And the other one I hadn't heard of, and it wasn't in the dictionary, was sextortion.
Well, so extortion, but yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, that's the requirement. Instead of
extorting sexual favors from someone by threatening to reveal evidence of their sexual activity.
And you Googled that? Okay, I just looked it up in my online dictionary. It wasn't there.
Probably have filters in this one. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, we are looking for a motion.
I'll move that we approve the
Instructional materials.
The minimum
Instructional
guidelines,
materials.
so we're calling them standards, but really they're in, we probably want to say the training, well,
the
we
human
said training.
trafficking
Training
guidelines
materials?
for parents and
Guidelines or training materials? Because we should make that consistent.
So let's go to the statute and see what's
Yeah.
required.
Yes, we
And in
should.
the statute, it states.
Instructional materials.
Instructional materials.
Titled instructional.
Okay. So if we make that in the motion, then that changes it.
So I move that we approve instructional materials for human trafficking for parents and guardians, and instructional materials for human trafficking for adults serving youth. And then we send it to the board for, we recommend that the board approve it.
Corby, do we also need the word minimum guidelines in there, or does instructional materials cover that? I just want to make sure we're.
So,
Oh, Patty has something to add in you.
so as we look at like materials, like this is at least the minimum that needs to be in the material.
Okay, so we do need minimum guidelines,
Yeah.
you would say.
The minimum expectation or guideline,
Okay,
whatever.
it just,
Yeah.
we want to make sure we add that
Yeah.
information.
Like you can have other stuff, but minimum you gotta have.
Okay, these, like, we expect this at the very
Yeah.
least. Okay,
Yeah.
and Patty?
I was trying to think, forward thinking of, the board's requested us looking at different buckets of standards. There's like the core standards.
Yeah.
And there's for electives, or, I mean, so
Yeah,
if this would, as long as we're not using the word standards.
We're
does
not
that mean
anymore.
Something else, okay.
Yeah, so it would be to forward, to approve the minimum guidelines and instructional materials for human trafficking prevention curriculum, which includes for parents and guardians as well as adults serving youth. Do we have discussion of that motion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Corby, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of our hardest areas.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I just like, how do you, but you look great, that's right.
Thank you, thank you. First council, go ahead and say.
All right. Okay, our last agenda item, we're going to have Leah come on up, and Leah, I love what you did with adding, I don't know if you guys saw that there's two things in the attachments. One says with possible motions. So they're the same thing, but Leah has gone through and added, if you wanted to add possible motions, which would cover about 5 of them, that she's given us some options so that we can help make them actionable. So let's have you talk about the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Let me inform you all that the chair of UC, sitting right over here, Karen Ponder, so she's joined us today. I'm so happy to have her. She tried to come, if you remember, before last, and you guys were so good and got so much work done so quickly. Didn't get it.
Well, it's good things were bad today. We try to be, we were, but these guys have to say smart things and discuss stuff.
We're right on here.
We're right on time. I mean, a little bit, because we have a lot to talk about with you here at the table, Missy.
Okay, so if you recall from a couple months ago, and Mark, you don't, but the advisory panel meets quarterly and reviews data related to special education services and compliance in the state of Utah and makes recommendations to the board. And I facilitate that committee, and so the recommendations come through me. So the last set of recommendations that we had a couple months ago, we had a discussion about not only the recommendations themselves, but the actions that you as a board would like to take as a result of UC making the recommendations. So we had a discussion about how to possibly bridge the gap between their recommendations and what actions you might direct staff to take and or changes that you might make. So the first version in Civic Clerk is simply the recommendation that the panel put together, that Karen actually put together. So the 9 numbered recommendations. Okay. So then the second version, and I have hard copies. I think it's easier for you to see it in hard copy.
Thank you. I've got it right.
You got it. Okay.
It was Janelle that did this one.
Oh, Janelle did this one. The
Okay.
former chair. Thank you, Karen. Yes.
Because they are another advisory committee, and so that they would see how another committee also instructs.
Oh yes, this would actually be great for you guys.
So let me tell you what's happened since. When UC made these initial recommendations, I sent them to Lorraine to give to board leadership. I included Superintendent Dixon and, of course, Deputy Superintendent Norman in the email, and Superintendent Dixon responded immediately and said, Leah, some of these recommendations are so great. Would you get an internal, a USPE internal committee together to talk about implementation of these recommendations? So we have done that. So that's just specialists and coordinators in our building. So we have already gone through all of them and begun to consider what we are already doing and what we could do related to these recommendations. So then the step 2 was Chair Gravitt asked me to then think through if the board wanted to make motions to direct staff to do anything if a motion was required, what some possible motions might be. So I thought through that, and I've given you information on each one of them about what we have done and what we could do, and what you as a committee could then recommend to the board we could do. Now, some of them are a little extreme, and so I tried to, I feel quite information about that. And I'll tell you, the one that in time, effort, and resources that would be extreme is the recommendation that the school administrators, training programs for school administrators, number 3, include a course and/or competencies on special education law. This used to be required in educational supervision administration programs in Utah. And while I have been here at the State Board of Education, that requirement has been taken away, and there is an education law class that was required, and they do talk a little bit about special ed in that law class, but they don't give a whole lot, right? So
Something that needs to go to or
right, exactly, and that's why this particular possible recommendation to require a course and/or competencies is a little extreme, because it would require, first of all, I've done some investigations since looking into this. You would have to change the rule. You would have to change the licensing rule for administration certificates, which you totally can. It's your rule. Higher education would need at least a year and possibly 2 years to be able to implement that requirement. And so that would require significant time, energy, and resource, and it would require secondary action by you as a board. Others of the recommendations we could implement, or you could just direct me to do so.
I wanted to ask you about that one. So do we teach classes, or could we teach classes to administrators on special ed compliance?
Yes, one of the things that I included is last year at the Special Education Law Conference, we included an entire day strand on special ed law for administrators.
Good.
And we had a room that would hold 300 administrators. We had 335 administrators register, so we had to put 35 of them on a wait list. They all showed up and they all stayed the entire day.
It's needed.
And that is almost half of the licensed administrators that we have in Cactus.
Wow.
Yeah, we had a fantastic attendance. So we did it again this year. In fact, we did it on Monday of this week. So we had 350 licensed educators at our special ed law conference. We had an opening session about how to implement a compliant special ed program. And in the afternoon, we had 2 sessions, one on providing FAPE, free appropriate public education, and one on IDA discipline, which is very complicated. And the administrators came, they stayed. So we do provide, yes, and then we also have the special education administrators meeting quarterly, where we provide professional development as well. We can always do more. And in fact, as a result of the fact that because statute changed, if you remember in the recent legislative session, special ed statute changed, so your rules have to change, and we're in the process of updating the special ed rules. So we are thinking, and I talked to board member Lear about it yesterday because she attended our special ed law conference, about adding to our special ed law conference next year a regional book study on the rules. So we would go across the state to anyone who would show up and do a day that would be the first day of the special ed law conference, although we come to them instead of them coming to us, and do a book study of the rules and just go, topic by topic by topic. This is what's in the board rule. Please follow it. Thank you very much.
You got to take that out. That's nice. With the guitar.
So, the answer to your question is yes, we can always do more, but so the other items on the list, we're looking into creating a specific website for parents. However, the Utah Parent Center has an extensive website for parents already that we already link to. So we, the internal committee that Superintendent Dixon asked us to put together is considering ways that we could help parents access the resources without duplicating resources, right?
Yeah.
So you could direct me to create a page
with a link.
Well, you could, yeah, but we already do link.
Right.
But
The problem is, as a parent, is you don't know where to go. So if you can Google it and the same thing comes, whatever comes to the top, if that's Utah Parent Center or whatever.
And having it more than one place is not a bad thing.
So it's,
And we do currently link to both the Parent Center and the Disability Law Center. We also link to the PTA, which Karen is the Special Needs Vice President of the PTA. So, but you're right. If you don't know where to go, you're just Googling and trying to find whatever comes to the top.
Yeah, you just can go Google.
So I'm happy to continue to talk about it, but I
wonder if, and you guys have a better way, I wonder if just going just briefly through the 9, and then if we want to make the motions on the ones that are
Can we do it on all of it?
Or can we just do it? So the motion that I put in Civic Clerk is to accept the recommendation.
That's what I think that would be the easiest thing.
And I do think that is the easiest, to just accept the recommendations, and then you could, if you wanted, you could add to direct me to implement.
Okay.
To review and implement.
So we could just make the motion at the end to recommend the board to accept the
I've already read it.
I have to.
Mark said he had, I don't know if Jenna has, maybe we don't need to read through them all.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone.
I'm good with that.
Do you have any questions for Leah? Are there questions you have, or not any pressure? Because
Right.
Sarah. Oh, I did have a question. Well, Sarah, come on up.
No one's going to ask a question. I just had a clarification. Really, these are comprehensive, really good recommendations. So, on number 7, the technical assistance, possibility of moving that to connect to licensure, and I wondered if that was the appropriate way, as you consider this, that professional development should take place, or maybe it's considering like what you just talked about with the human trafficking, suicide prevention, that there are those pieces that districts offer on an annual basis. It's not necessarily, on my route to licensure, but is part of the compliance of districts. So I put that out there as how you might implement that technical assistance piece.
Okay. Do you have a comment on that? Or?
You might want to ask Karen why they decided to go that direction of attaching it to licensure.
Karen, would you like to come to the table?
I think the conversation is worth hearing about.
Yeah, I would like to hear.
So I'm not the one that wrote this.
Tell us who you are.
I'm Karen Condor. I am the current chairman. This was written by the former chairman. If I remember right, I believe they felt like it was important enough they wanted to make sure that everybody got that training, that it wasn't just, you know, a choice thing, that it was that everybody had it because it was important enough that they wanted to make sure that everybody understood those rules.
Interesting, I will say, as somebody who just had to relicense, having it every year, I get more and more out of it than I do every 5 years. So that would be my comment on that, because you're rushing, you're checking things off, but yearly is just a thought from the teacher. Any other questions? Looking.
So would you accept a motion?
I would love to accept a motion
to approve this document that is, as it has been presented to us, and pass it on to the rest of the board.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to accept the UC recommendations and pass them on to the full board. Any discussion of that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Are there any other specific motions that anybody wants to make? We'll just pass them on and have those there.
One thing I can ask you, since I come about every other month with UC recommendations because we meet quarterly, if you would like, I could give you an update of the previous recommendation when I bring the new recommendation to you.
Yeah, I think that would be
To
good.
kind of, so that you can keep track of what we are actually implementing and how we're implementing.
That would be good. Oh, thank
Sure.
you, Leah. Super great. You guys, we're done. Thanks, committee. Oh, yeah. He might lie to us. Yes. He doesn't want to get paid.
I gotta start looking at the